I'm a sleepless friend, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues.
Okay, so we've got Jared Cooney, Horvath, and David Bott, the co-writers of a great new book from John Catt, which is 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right. And I read through this last night, and I was thinking, I hadn't looked at it, full disclosure, and I was thinking, oh no, I've got to read this book in front of this interview. It's going to be a hard slog. And I was riveted. Found it compelling, and I went through it in one sitting. Loved it. Loads of things in there that I'd want to talk to you about. But tell me a little bit before we get going. How did you guys come to write this book together? What's the story behind the book?
Yeah, so I think David has been working in Melbourne forever. At a school down south, and I just moved here a while ago, and lo and behold, we knew each other existed. Like, I knew you were around, David. We just never met each other till one day I got to do a couple of sessions with the school, with the students there, and we just kept bumping it. After each session, we would sit there and BS a little bit, and he would always push me back. Didn't matter what I said. It could have been the best thing in the world, and he would have come up and said, yeah, but have you thought about this?
He's that
Maybe
guy.
you one of them. He's that
True.
guy.
Well, it's because most of what you say is rubbish, Jared. That's why.
Yeah.
I had to just clarify things for you.
And I didn't know
So-
until you pointed out. So eventually you just keep talking. You talk over a couple of beers. You go over to each other's houses and you say, hey, and it was you. You said, do you want to write a book? I've got a title.
Yeah.
And I go, absolutely. And then lay it out, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are. I've been in education been teaching for 15 years before I met Jared, and these kind of 10 things have been percolating for all of those years, and I'd never really had the impetus, the courage to put them into words. And I think with Jared's expertise around the learning science and the neuroscience, it just added a layer of sophistication to my kind of intuitive thinking around education. So it felt like a really a nice marriage, not a marriage in that way. Although, I shouldn't do it in public. Should I propose, Jared? No, but it did feel like a nice mix, a nice blend of our skills and backgrounds. So it was really fun to write.
Okay, so we've got these 10 things that schools are doing wrong. So they've been percolating in the back of your mind, David, for countless years. Jared comes along with his newfangled science and gives you intellectual permission for those ideas to take more shape. Let's go through and think about some of those ideas. So the first one, essentially, is that is about the profession of teaching, and while teaching meets various sort of ticks on what it means to be a profession, it fails on one particular count in that the experts who are at the forefront of deciding what teachers do don't tend to be teachers, and so teachers are, for instance, very underrepresented at education conferences, and that we rely on people from outside the profession to give us guidance on what we should be doing. Can you tell us a little bit about this as an idea?
Yeah, so and I think most teachers would recognize this is that those who can't do teach type of kind of concept where, hey, I've been to school, I know how to teach, I've worked with teachers, I know how to teach. And for so long, teachers have been seen as cogs in a wheel. And actually, I'm not making this up. I was at a government meeting a couple of years ago, and there were no teachers present at all at that meeting. There was researchers, neuroscientists, lawyers, politicians. And when I said, hey, why is there no teachers here? The explanation was because they're simply levers we're pulling. The kids are the ones we care about, and we're the ones making the decisions, and they're the ones who just have to make this stuff happen. And that's, I'm sorry, complete and utter nonsense to me. But I think they've been browbeaten for so long. So I was a teacher back in the day, so I recognize it from 20 years ago. You get browbeaten so long and told that the answer lies somewhere else that you stop looking to yourself for that answer, and you start waiting for the world to tell you what's the answer to teaching. Can you write a book that tells me do these 10 things, don't do these 10 things? And at the end of the day, if the one thing you take away from this book is that teachers, by the very definition of the word expertise, they are the experts at the craft of teaching. So the only answers we'll ever get about what teaching is, how it should work, how to do it best, has to come from them. Everyone else is just talking. Like, I could tell you about dentistry because I brush my teeth, But until I'm a dentist working on the ground 24/7, hopefully you don't trust me with any of that stuff. Yet that's what we tend to do with teaching.
Right. Okay. So David, if we accept that argument, it does seem, as you say, to chime with teachers' experience. What should we do? How do we solve the problem? How do we get teachers at the heart of the discussion about what teaching should look like?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's we want teachers to believe in themselves, and I think
Right.
from what we've seen we argue really in the book that it's really that lack of belief in themselves that is the core problem here. And as Jared said, teachers spend 1,000 hours a year, face to face with students and build up this incredible skill set throughout their careers and a level of expertise that that no one else outside of the profession can have in that craft of being in front of students and delivering content and nurturing well-being and inspiring students. And so we feel that the starting point is for teachers to believe that they are experts, to know that they are experts, and then to create a system that enables the sharing, the collaboration, and the accumulation and dissemination of knowledge that comes from those experts. So collecting that knowledge base somehow, distributing it somehow, ensuring that we can all learn from each other, as you see in most other professions where there's a formalized process to share in the expertise of colleagues.
And I think can I jump on the back of that? I love that. 'Cause if you think about science, if you think about law, if you think about anthropology, it doesn't matter. Every field has a body of knowledge produced by, every professional field has a body of knowledge produced by the experts in that field. And that body of knowledge is very consistent. Everyone knows, so if you're an expert in that field, you know how to tap into it, you know how to find what you need. This is how we work science. It doesn't matter that there's a billion of us doing a billion different projects, because we have this consistent body of knowledge that we have to feed into, that everyone knows how to use and work. That's where we start to think, if teachers can find a way, and there's suggestions out there, we don't want to be the ones to say, do it this way, but how do you build that body of knowledge so that what you're doing all day, every day, you're always experimenting in your class. You don't have a bad class and come do the same thing tomorrow. You tweak, you change, you move. That's evidence. How do we just collate this evidence into some sort of useful body of knowledge that the experts know what it means, know how to use it, know how to work it? That's where we start getting that professionalism back.
Okay, and that sort of segues into the second section of your book about evidence. And one of the things that we've experienced over recent years in here in the UK is that I think with the advent of teachers taking to social media, they've found a voice, they found a mechanism to speak to other teachers, which didn't really exist before. And so I think because of that, we've seen movements like Research Ed, which I know has made it to Australia, where education researchers and teachers have been brought together, and the researchers talk about the research and the teachers talk about how they're applying it in classrooms, and that seems like a really healthy dialogue, and one which you appear, my reading of it is that you're really advocating in your book that when we cite evidence, the question that you would ask is, whose evidence is it? Is it evidence that comes from a psychology lab or from a neuroscience experiment, or is it evidence of how teachers have been using this stuff productively in classrooms?
And what you see is most people, you're spot on, most people will use the term evidence considering or assuming that it's a singular thing. Evidence is what fits in this box called science, till you realize that no, every field in the world has a very different definition of evidence. Lawyers, evidence is precedents. Go back to anthropologists, evidence is stories, is myths. No other field has to accept your evidence. It's the people, the experts who work within your field. So long as they agree this is evidence for us, this is what matters to us, then that becomes meaningful evidence for your field. And I think what a lot of these movements before Research Ed, and I think Research Ed is probably the best one to do this. Before that, it was a lot of, we have scientific research born in the laboratory, tell that to teachers, and then complain when they don't know how to use it, because our evidence is very different than what's meaningful evidence in a classroom. The numbers, the stats I have to crunch, and the way I have to run my research in a lab isn't anywhere near what matters to a teacher. How do I run 30 year 5 kids on a Friday afternoon to try and teach them math? The two are just very separate, and we've been trying to shoehorn our evidence into your field forever. And now I think with research ed, that's when they said, okay, there's evidence here, but what is your evidence? What does this mean for you? And that's where we're going to get the juice. Have the teachers. That's what I love. Whenever a research ed conference comes up here and I look at the schedule and it's about 75 to 80% teachers instead of researchers, I'm like, that's it. There you go. It might sound crazy, but that's the step. The day I stop going to conferences to talk to teachers as a researcher is the day that teachers have stepped up. And although I might be shooting myself in the foot, that's what I'm really looking for.
Great. Okay. So one of the things that, from my own personal experience, is that 8 years ago I stopped teaching. I've been teaching full time for 15 years, and I quit, turned to the dark side, and become an education consultant. And then I had all of this space to think and to formulate my ideas and write books and stuff like that. And recently I've made a bit of a return to the classroom. I'm teaching part time, and it is full on. Let me tell you, you are on your toes, and the time to think and the time to reflect is squeezed. And I think that maybe, one of the things that occurs to me that has been the case in some parts of the world in the past is that teachers are given sabbaticals at various points and allowing them to pursue sort of intellectual ideas and reflect on the craft of teaching. Do you think that would be a good way to sort of reclaim some teacher expertise?
Yeah, I mean, I like that, David. I think any opportunity that teachers have to think deeply, as you say, about their craft rather than just doing the busy work of teaching is crucial. I think what we're also saying, a couple of other thoughts that we're exploring really is that that if there is a repository of knowledge somewhere, so that when I'm a first-year teacher, I'm able to look at all of the best first-year teachers in the world and know what they did yesterday in their class or what they did in their first year of teaching. We accelerate the development of teachers in a way that doesn't exist at the moment. And I think probably, David, you and me, we were okay teachers. And I was not a pretty good, I was a pretty good teacher, and I'm sure you are as well. And kids like me, I got on all right. But I was awful in my first year of teaching.
Yeah,
because,
me too.
How do I know? Where do I even go to try to understand what a world-class first-year teacher should be doing? And of course, there are ways now, and as you said, social media helps a little bit. But we'd like to really centralize this repository somehow, so we can have really a much more powerful way to accelerate the development of new teachers. Let me say, there's one other thought we had as well, David, and that's this, that we're starting to see an emerging trend in some progressive schools of decoupling the role of teacher. Because when you say, David, you've gone back to teaching, what that means is you've gone back, you are teaching, of course, and if you're a head of a department, you're also kind of an HR person, and you're a parent liaison, and you're a medical professional, and the role of teacher is so coupled in with all of this peripheral stuff that teachers do relatively little teaching, in many schools. And the irony is that the better you become as a teacher, the less you're allowed to teach, because you end up in middle management or senior management. So we're very passionate about allowing teachers to teach. Just as Roger Federer plays tennis all day because he's good at and the better he got at tennis, the more he played. We want the best teachers in the world to be teaching by decoupling some of this other peripheral stuff that takes away from the opportunity, as you say, for teachers to refine their craft.
Okay, that's interesting. One of the things we've had here in the last couple of years in the UK is an early career framework put together, which has been received with, rarely for a government initiative. It's been received with almost universal acclaim as a really solid template for early career teachers, and very much, classroom practitioners were involved in the genesis of that template. So maybe that's some sort of green shoots that are showing some of the signs that you're hoping for. Okay, so the next stage of the book, after you talk about evidence and after you talk about expertise, there's then a chapter on homework, and I found that one really interesting. One, it's a bit of a change of pace, but also you have some really solid arguments against homework. But I found myself thinking, and I'd like you to put me right on this. I was thinking, you've chosen this target homework. Is it really such a bad thing? Is it really such a big deal? What should we be? Why should we be worried about homework? And what should we do instead?
Let me start by asking you a question, David. Roughly how many hours of homework? I know you've read the book, so here's a test. How many hours of homework are going to be done by Australian students this year?
No, I'm sorry, I've forgotten. Go on. Sorry, remind me.
It's just under 500 million. So it's 400 million hours of homework.
each kid. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Australia, yeah, it's an amazing country. So 400 million hours of homework will be done by Australian students this year.
Yeah.
So homework is one way to consume that time. There are many other ways to consume the time. And I think the question we're really trying to grapple with in the book is, homework inherently for older students seems to be moderately beneficial for learning. There's zero evidence that it has any benefit for young children, particularly elementary, primary school. In fact, there's a fair bit of evidence suggesting that it can be quite harmful because it becomes a second shift from the school, that students end up losing their passion, that it detracts from other opportunities with family and playing sport and reading for pleasure. So the question is, even for secondary students or high school students, is homework the best use of that incredibly valuable youthful time? Or should they be out exploring the world, being out in nature, playing with their friends? Even with middle school students, the argument sometimes is, look, homework's better than them playing Fortnite. At least if they're doing homework, at least if there's no education benefit, at least if there's no academic benefit, at least they're not on the computer if they're doing my geography.
Yeah.
But there are some benefits of playing Fortnite, and we see some of our, some more introverted students really developing powerful friendships online that they wouldn't otherwise have. And, there's a lot of cooperation, teamwork, collaborative skills they're learning. Fortnite, obviously, there are some problems with it. And I'm not saying it's a panacea or even an alternative to homework, obviously. But we just need to be very careful when we're consuming that much of a child's life. We just need to ask the question, is it working? Because that's what we analyze in the book. Really, is there any evidence for this? Because it's 400 million hours in Australia. Is there any evidence? Does it do harm? The answer is potentially yes for young children. Is it worth the benefit for older students? Potentially in some situations. But we really, really want teachers, in the book we say the default position should be no homework. Unless you've got a really good excuse, a really good argument, really good rationale, then of course, let's do homework. But let's think through it rather than just doing it because we did it last year or because I got homework as a student 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. When we were researching this one too, it was kind of shocking. So coming from a learning perspective, David nailed it. The younger kids don't really benefit from it. What they benefit from is working with their parents. So if you're a primary kid and your parents are reading to you, that seems to be a big boost, as opposed to this homework, because they don't know how to handle it. So they end up just doing things they already know how to do. It's a waste of time. As you get older, it seems to be more effective. But the trick seems to be, and so I'm totally for homework for older kids because that's what we got to do. But where I start to come in is that opportunity cost issue is okay. Now, how much is there? So, and then when I started digging through the numbers around the world, in the US especially, it's frightening how much homework they can give some people. Even in elementary years, they're going 30 to 45 minutes on average. It's like, what are we doing? So a good rule of thumb to remember when it comes to homework. So if we're going to do it because it's beneficial for learning, cool. It's not a linear relationship. It's not more homework equals better. No. It seems to be a curvilinear relationship where you get benefits up to a certain point, it plateaus, and then it actually starts to harm learning. And so that kind of perfect decusation point seems to be, for older kids at least, right around 60 minutes. Once they start doing more than 60 minutes of homework, their learning just plateaus. They learn nothing. Between 60 and 90 minutes, they learn no more than in that first 60. And after 90, it starts to drop down, where now if I do 2 hours of homework, I'm probably going to learn and remember less than if I just did an hour. So this is where you now get to say, okay, opportunity cost. Not only might it hurt your learning, but that's an hour you could have been playing music. That's an hour you could have been hanging out with your friends, talking to your parents, reading with your parents. Who knows what else you're going to be doing? But that, I promise you, is going to be more beneficial than that extra boost of homework. So just how are we using it, and make sure we're not pushing it way too hard.
Okay, so there might be some benefit for a sweet spot for some children at a particular age, there's that inverted U, but then it starts to tail off and then it starts to become damaging. Okay, that's really interesting. So when I certainly feel as a parent, when my children were in primary school, elementary school, they were often given homeworks which seemed like tasks for parents. So you had to build papier-mâché castles or whatever, and they would come home with this stuff, and I'd be like, oh God, I don't want to do that.
That's
And
yours. That's your job.
homework for me, and so that felt really annoying. And certainly as they got older, sometimes they'd come home. I remember one infamously. When my eldest daughter first went into secondary school, she had homework from her design technology teacher, which was to design 6 different pizza toppings, and she had to draw the pizza toppings onto a piece of paper. And the guidance that came with it said that if you design 4 pizza toppings, then you're a level 4, but if you design 5 pizza toppings, you're a level 5. And 6 means you're a level. I'm looking at this thinking, it's obviously nonsense. It's just colouring in.
Yep.
And so it's that sort of stuff where I feel really, really sympathetic. Let's get rid of homework for homework's sake.
Yeah.
But where, and I'm pushing back on you a little bit here, and David, maybe you can sort of straighten me out a little bit. That if I think as a teacher, actually I've decided that there would be value for my students going home doing a bit of reading, or there'd be value for me getting them to look something up and come back to talk about it. Is that justifiable, David?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, we see for older kids particularly, we see some moderate to high benefits of homework for older students in high school. And we think that's mostly because in part because often they're passionate about the subject. They've chosen that subject rather than it being imposed on them. In part because they have the cognitive skills to work more independently by themselves. In part because often the teachers are crafting more intelligent homework rather than just trying to keep kids busy. So I think there's a lot of reasons why for older students, there's some really significant benefit of high quality homework. But it has to be that, David. And that's really our key argument here is we're not trying to argue that homework's a waste of time or pointless. What we're really trying to argue, especially for high school students, is that we want teachers to be really critical in reading the science, understanding when homework works and when it doesn't, and being really intelligent about the way they're crafting the homework. And also, working with students to allow them a real sense of autonomy and ownership over what's occurring. So there's absolutely some very strong benefits for homework when it's done well.
And you nailed it too, David, because you said like looking up stuff. That's where the homework is good, is when you're using recall, repetition, something that's helping you lock down a certain idea, or you're practicing a certain skill that you understand well enough, and now we're just locking it down. It's when homework becomes busy work, when homework becomes work for the parents. What are we doing? It's cute, it's sweet. You get to tick a box, but there's no learning going on. So what do we need to do?
Yeah. Okay. No. So it's not get rid of homework. It's just think a lot more intelligently about it. I like that. Okay. Great. So let's move on to next question, which is about you give. And this was music to my ears. You give 21st century schools a little bit of a quiet savaging in the book, and I've got, and you talk about, that, and I didn't know. Maybe you can tell us in a moment a little bit about the origins of the C21 skills. So that was a great little story. But I've got a quote here from the book, page 78 of the book, and you're talking about, the fact that these skills don't transfer. Not only do they not transfer from university or education into employment, but they don't transfer between employment. And you say, this phenomenon is not confined to first-time employees. An estimated 50% of new hires across every level of employment, from entry to executive, fail within 18 months. The fact that all people across all levels of employment struggle to move their well-established C21 skills between jobs means something deeper must be driving this pattern, something more fundamental. So what's going on?
Welcome to the transfer dilemma. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about coming from learning, is this idea that we love this concept that skills are movable, that once you've demonstrated you can do something here, then you can go do it everywhere. And one of the big kind of jokes about biology is, nope, that's almost exactly contrary to how most higher order biology works, is when you learn something, your brain, your body doesn't want to continue to keep that online and be like, oh, sweet, this is a new, let's play with it over here. Let's do it over here. Your body wants to automate it. It wants to lock it down so you no longer need to think about it, so that you can now focus your time, attention on other things. It's the driving story all over again. You don't want to think every time you get in a car. Your body wants to lock driving down so that you can think about other things. The problem is once you lock a skill down, once it becomes automated, it becomes real hard to consciously tweak. And a lot of transfer is explicit tweaking of skills. Skills change between realms. Creativity in art is very different than creativity in medicine, is very different than creativity in the laboratory. We use the same word, it's slightly different skill sets. But in order to tweak my skill set, I've got to bring something that's now deeply subconscious into my conscious and play with it. It's not impossible. We do it all the time. It's just we want it to be automatic. And unfortunately, it's not. And so that's what we see is it's not just in school, it's across all human endeavor. And so we use employment in this case as just another broader thing where we see it all the time. Jump between jobs and watch as your skills dip. Why? Because you need to go through the process of transfer. It's not automatic. It's something we have to do.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't know if you've come across the American economist Brian Kaplan, and he's got a great quote from his book, The Case Against Education, which if you haven't read, it's very entertaining. And he said, though some educational psychologists deny that education must yield minimal transfer, almost all admit that actual existing education does yield minimal transfer. And then he goes on to say, when someone insists their product has big, hard to see benefits, you should be dubious by default, especially when the easy to see benefits are small. And I thought that was a really good sort of summary of some of the problem with the things that you're speaking to here, that you know, we want transfer to happen, we want these big benefits to exist, but in actual fact, when we go looking, it's really difficult to find the evidence.
And the trick is to recognize, okay, once you know that it's not an automatic process, then you can ask yourself, okay, what does it take? It has to be an explicit thing. And what we do is in the chapter, we'll kind of go through the three different basic levels that it takes. Is first, you need knowledge, then you need to recontextualize your skills, then you need to adapt your skills. That process is essentially, we'll just call it simple, is essentially the process of learning. That's how you enter into any new field. Once you recognize that it's an explicit process that we have to go through, then we start to recognize that, cool, we can teach kids in this. This is one of those few things, for as much as skills aren't transferable, the skill of learning, of going through transfer, is transferable. Why? Because it is the skill we use to enter into different realms. I don't care if you're going into law, into medicine, into carpentry, into dentistry, whatever you're choosing, you're going to have to go through the same process of knowledge, knowledge, contextualization, adaptation. So what we tend to do now as teachers, and this is what most schools do, is we Trojan horse transfer in. Like, we hope that it happens and we give them chances and we give them guiding questions, when in actuality, no, we just got to make it explicit. Hey guys, transfer. How does this question relate to that? Ooh, we're struggling with transfer. How did what we do last week tie into here? We make the process of learning, we don't hide it. We make that the game, the goal. That's what we do and talk about all day, every day. So that when kids graduate, no, they might not be able to automatically transfer their skills, but trust me, they'll be able to do it in about 4 to 6 months as opposed to 18 months if they know the process and it's not a game to them. They go, oh, starting a new job, I got to start my transfer process. Where do I begin? So it's just, how do we make it more explicit instead of just hiding it? And that's what most of us, that's what I used to do as a teacher. So that's what a lot of people in education do. Hope it happens, and it won't.
Right.
Okay. Can I jump in just there, David? I think just a lot. So Jared's helped me a lot with this. I think you used the word hide it or Trojan horse, Jared. I think that's slightly unfair, because I think actually and I know you use the word lightly, but I think genuinely what great teachers do is they intuitively do all of those processes, you know, but as you say, Jared, it's just not explicit. And they should, like, it baffles me having, had these conversations with Jared, having read the literature. Why is that not? Why is learning not the first subject that a student learns in year seven. Well, like what we teach math. There's only one reason we teach maths, right? There's only one reason, and that's because it matters. Only one reason we teach language, because it matters. Why do we not teach learning as an explicit skill? Because it is a skill that you can learn and get better at. And we argue that really teachers, what we're hoping teachers do, as they understand this further, is that that this process enables the teacher to weaponize their intuition, if you like, to bring it to life, to enable students to see that it is just a skill that can be learned like any other skill. And arguably, as Jared says, it may be the only genuinely transferable skill because it can be applied throughout your life. So crucial skill that we want students to be able to experience more explicitly.
Okay, so and that's another neat segue to another question that I had on my list to ask you. So there are some things where where the children find really easy to learn, and these things are sometimes by some evolutionary psychologists being called biologically primary domains of knowledge. Things like learning to speak your mother tongue, or learning to cooperate with groups, or the folk knowledge of biology and physics and so on. Yeah. And then there are other pieces of knowledge which are more culturally specific, but perhaps biologically secondary, where we can, as you rightly say, we can learn these things. We can transfer this ability to learn across these domains, but we don't find it nearly as easy. And the argument is these biologically primary domains of knowledge don't require much instruction, whereas these culturally specific bodies of knowledge are things that evolution hasn't yet caught up with, probably never will, and therefore we need really explicit instruction to induct children to transfer their ability to learn to these new areas. Does that seem like a plausible argument to you?
Absolutely. And so that's what I love is if we had time, we'd go deeply into it. But the way the brain develops is you can assume between, say, birth and about 5, 6, 7, where do you want to push that limit? You're in a whole different ballgame. You can essentially take everything we know about the science of learning, and it is a massive field, and we've been doing it for about 150 years now. You can take all of that, and 99.9% of it only makes sense once kids hit the age of 5, 6, 7 and beyond. Before that time, we were in a whole different ballgame where the brain functions essentially very differently. What the brain is doing in those first couple of years is just pretty much pure intake. We just call it bottom up. Everything gets in, everything gets. When you have young kids, you notice it. They remember everything. Why? Because that's the system on. When the system flips at 5, 6, 7 into what we'll now call cognitive, or what Geary would call those secondary biological learning. Yeah. Now we're in a new game where now the science of learning stuff comes on, where we have to say, okay, we have to actually work our memory. We have to work our attention. Language isn't an automatic thing. It's now a cognitive game where I have to link that word to that. It's not a one and done. I have to think my way through it. So what you see is a lot of those primary skills, they require almost no effort because the system is at this point input. So once you flip, that's where this transfer issue is going to start to come in. Once you hit the cognitive realm of 7 and beyond, that's where we now have to think, okay, what we're going to learn past here is going to be done in a very different way. So we have to think about it slightly differently. And what's interesting too, and I don't know where I sit on this yet, but this is a big thing me and David talk about a lot, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. There's a difference between transfer and application. So let's just say I've got a runner, a dude who sprints all the time. Congratulations. He's got incredible lung capacity and his legs are strong. Now I take that sprinter and I take him to play football, where instead of running straight, they have to run side by side by side. The ability to move your legs and juke, that's going to be transfer. You're going to have to take your 10 years of running straight and now tweak your legs, tweak your muscles to make these cuts so you can actually start to juke on the field. That's transfer. Whereas the lung capacity, that's simply application. Absolutely nothing changes between this realm and this realm. You're still breathing the same air. You're still inhaling the same time, you would assume. So that to me looks like that wouldn't be transfer. That would just be application of a skill that you already have that required no effort. So where's the line drawn between skills that require some form of transfer and skills that are innate. I don't even know if you'd call them skills, but I think there is something to be said that there are some things that are simply applied. Application of a skill doesn't require transfer. So where does that line? And I don't know what the answer is, but hopefully that sparks some ideas in some of the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because one of the examples you give in the book is, Jared, you trying to transfer your ability to drive a car from the US to Australia, and that wasn't automatic. That took careful and systematic application to get right.
And you would think that would be one of the easier ones, but yet when you switch from 6 inches from this seat over to this seat, I became an idiot. It was pretty piss poor, and I still do it now. Go back to all of our skills are built upon older skills. So last year I was moving home, and so of course I'm really stressed. And anytime I was super stressed, I would go to my car and I would get in the American side and reach up for a steering wheel that wasn't there. So I still, even though I've been here for 10 years now, my American pattern, when I'm not thinking, my American pattern is the first thing that comes on. So I'm still at some level transferring every time I drive here. There's still a little niggle that's saying you should be doing it this way, but nope, you got to focus this way. So it's trippy.
It's a really, and that's an interesting conundrum, sort of more widely in education, the sort of misconceptions that children sometimes pick up quite early. They never completely shape them. They learn to suppress them, perhaps, but that takes effort. And as you say, in a stress situation, maybe like an exam, that's then harder to do. Which
that may be beneficial if you think about it, because our genes are largely additive. They do, so genetics, the way we became who we are is genes learned, don't get rid of anything. If something new comes on, keep that and the old thing, because we never know when we're going to need to go back. So believe it or not, if we hit an ice age, we've got genes that epigenetically will turn on and we'll start to grow hair really fast, because in our past we've had an ice age and our genes said, hold on to that just in case. I think it's the same thing with cognition. Is pretty much every story we build, everything we get, the brain doesn't get rid of it. The brain doesn't say, oh, we've got a new idea, scrap it. It simply adds to it because it never knows when it's going to need this other thing. So it's a conservative system by and large, which is awesome on one hand, because now when I was young, I believed in Santa Claus. I grew up, I didn't. But now that I have kids, well, I'm working on it, but I work with kids who still believe in Santa Claus. I'm fine with it. I haven't forgotten that, and I'm allowed to interact with them because I've conserved that story rather than just ditching it. So on one hand, it's good, but on the other hand, that conservation may be the big issue with transfer and why it's not automatic, why it requires constant vigilant effort.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It also reminds me of a study that I read some years ago by Cynthia Wooldridge, where they found that one of the things they found in this was that when they prompted students, this pretty much aligns with what you've already said, when they prompted them and they said, this particular piece of knowledge is going to be transferred to this particular set of other domains, children were much, much more likely to be able to transfer the knowledge. So just that explicit prompting seems to be in some way beneficial. So that's good news. But so I started talking there about the stress situation of exams, and you talk in the book about something we make it's almost synonymous with exams, which is grades. And you make some really good arguments, some really compelling arguments about the problem with grades. And it'd be really good, David, if you could sort of summarize some of those for us. And then I want to get into sort of what do we do instead. So, David, what are the problems with grades?
Yeah, firstly, similarly, a little bit with homework, David, I think the biggest problem with grades is almost every teacher in the world, every school in the world does grades because we did them last year and because we did them the year before. And the reason we did them the year before is because the system asked us to. There are very few, and I've had this discussion with hundreds of teachers around the world. There are very few teachers in the world who will say grading kids is an essential, fundamental part of academia. And we feel that if we could create the whole system again, we'd start with grades because it's a beautiful way to nurture curiosity and wisdom in children. No one says that. We use grades because it's part of the system. And that's not okay for a start. So first, show me evidence that it works, because I'll show you a whole lot of evidence that it doesn't, and we explain all of this in the book. One of the biggest problems with grades is it drives it's so linked to extrinsic motivation. So we have students who are striving to achieve a grade for no other purpose than to achieve a grade. And so we have all these problems associated with grading. We also have the arbitrary nature of grades, that grades are not measuring anything other than performance on a test. Like they're not measuring the child's curiosity, they're not measuring the child's capacity, they're not measuring the child's talent even. All a grade can do, even at best, a grade can do is measure a child's performance on a test, which is such an arbitrary way to use to rank a child's capacity within schooling. And why are we ranking anyway? Like, why are we trying to compare one child to another? So within an arbitrary group of students who are only put there because they happen to live in the same geographical area and happen to be born in the same month or same year. So there's so much arbitrary elements of grading. So that's a really crucial problem with grades as a starting point. And I think another key element of grades is that they're a performance measure. They're not a mastery-based measure. They're not. They're forcing students to aim for a specific performance-based target rather than trying to focus on constant evolution and development. And so because of the categorical nature of grades, it's forcing students to, forcing us away from this mastery-based concept, which is really the natural way humans learn. You know, there's no human gets born thinking, well, I've got to achieve a B in walking. The way we are primed to learn, and Jared talks about this a lot, but the way we're primed to learn is to iterate across via mistake and via learning and via mimicking of other people, but to iteratively learn constantly. The grading system's all designed to run counter to our natural instincts to learn and to foster learning in others. And also, David, one of the other problems is it fosters competition because grades are inherently competitive, whereas humans are not inherently competitive. We're inherently collaborative. In fact, it's the only real superpower that humans have as a species is our ability to live together, to collaborate, to empathize, to nurture each other. And grades are intentionally designed to run counter to that natural human instinct. In fact, you know, the pinnacle of kind of the power of grades is in an examination, right? Where for an hour, for 90 minutes, or for 2 hours, we say to students, forget about everything you learned about these 21st century skills. Forget about teamwork, forget about collaboration, forget about compassion. All of those 21st century skills, we're going to call them cheating now. Just for this next 22 hours, if you see your friend struggling over there, don't help him. Even though we've taught you about competition, teamwork and collaboration, support and all this, don't do that in the examination. That's now cheating. In fact, what you're going to do is beat that friend, and that's how you win at school. And so when we have this winning of school built around beating your friend by scoring some arbitrary score on a test, there's all sorts of counter-human elements to that are depriving students of joy in education. So that's so many fundamental elements there that we have problems with.
I think it goes in. The scary thing now is it goes even deeper too, as well, is where now you start to recognize that the way human cognition works is we base our thinking off of our stories, and most of our stories, a huge majority of our stories then will come from the tools that we use. When you use a clock, the clock defines the world in a very specific way. When you use the clock, you now have to use that worldview, and the world seems like it's made up of minutes, seconds, hours. Even though that's us, that's not out there, that's us, sweet. Grades are a tool, which means when we use tools, we change our worldview. It's not neutral. When we start using grades, it's not, oh, it was good, it was bad. It literally changes the way we understand and make sense of the world. And what grades, by and large, force us to see the world as is, you call this the worldview of grades, is reify, quantify, and rank. Reify, you have to make things real. Quantify, you have to assign value to those things. Rank, you then say this is better than this. That's a totally non-natural thing, but that's a thing that when you use grades, you have to reify, quantify, rank it. Creativity. Well, if I have to assign a grade to it, I have to reify it. I have to turn it into a thing. It can't be an ephemeral. It has to be a thing. Now I have to quantify it. You're a 6 out of 10. You're an 8 out of 10. You're a 7 out of 10. Why would I quantify? Because now I can rank. This kid is more creative than this kid. The question then becomes, once you do this for so long, we've been doing it for 200 years, how does that change our worldview to the point where we don't even notice? Now you start to see most people assume the purpose of school is to get a job. Why would they assume it's that? Because we're ranking kids. We need to be ranking them for something. What are we ranking them for? To get into universities. Who rank them so they can get the best jobs? What does that do for teachers? That means our job becomes nothing more than, what are the best strategies that can increase my kids' rank? These are where and I love them to death, but these are where the Hattie and the Marzanos of the world come in and say, do these 10 things, they're more powerful than these 10 things. Yeah, to increase student rank. They don't hide from it. That's exactly what they're saying these 10 things are going to help you do. As teachers now, we become nothing but rank increasers or rank decreasers. And students, it's probably they're the hardest hit in that they now view the world as nothing more than reify, quantify, rank. I am only as good as the world tells me I am. My grade is. So now when things like Twitter and Facebook and things pop up, that feeds right. Where do they learn that everything I do is only important if I get 10 likes or if I get 10 thumbs up on Twitter? Anything less than that, it must have been bad. Nope, that's a definition of narcissism. You've externalized your identity, allowed the world to determine it for you. Where would you think that was important? It's because at school, that's all we feed them. When you use the tool, you have to assume the worldview. And that tool of grading just has a really wonky worldview that we're seeing consequences of left and right.
Okay, so and I'm sympathetic to some of these things. I'm going to give you a little bit of pushback here. So first, but when we say things aren't natural, houses aren't natural, healthcare isn't natural. There's a hell of a lot of things which are brilliant that humans have invented, which are certainly not natural. So saying something's bad because it's unnatural, I'm kind of really skeptical of that as an idea.
Not saying it's bad because it's unnatural, just pointing out that most of our tools, bicycles, are unnatural.
Yeah.
It's to point out that a lot of people take these things for granted. Like, this is the natural order of things. And all I'm pointing out is, no, that was that was us. We constructed this. And if we constructed it, we're allowed to interrogate it. And if we're allowed to interrogate it, we can decide if we want to keep it or ditch it.
Right. Okay. So one of the things that sort of I've definitely noticed when talking to parents as a teacher, and certainly being a parent, is that when my kids come home and say, this is the grade I got, one of the first things that I'm interested in is I say to them, what did everyone else get? Because the grade is arbitrary. I know the grade's arbitrary. I know, if they've come back and they've got a grade 6, I don't really know what that means. So, and if it turns out everyone else has got a grade higher, that's a problem. And if everyone else is a grade lower, brilliant. So if, the first thing I'm interested in is kind of, how are you relative to the other people in the class? Because I want you to be about the same as everyone else. That's how I know you're kind of okay. And so, one of the things that, that I've heard or, come to sort of maybe think myself about grades is that maybe that the exam system and grades being part of that is the worst possible way to assess students apart from all of the other ways. And so if we accept your argument, what's the better way to evaluate whether or not we're doing a good job in education? Maybe if we don't have grades, we can just do what the hell we like. We can waste kids' time. We can follow whatever our whims and fancies are. Certainly, when I was at school, we did have grades, but the teachers were far, far less accountable for them. It was very much like, if you get a bad grade, that's your fault. And so one of the negative consequences to that is that in many of the cases of the teachers I had, they literally did whatever the hell they fancied, and some of them did stuff which was completely counterproductive. And I felt, pretty let down by that. And so, this is tricky stuff, isn't it?
David, you've got some ideas.
Yeah, it is tricky. Look, I think what we acknowledge, David, and you and I have both spent 15 years in classrooms, is that this is there's no easy solution here. And teachers are using this tool, as Jared describes, because it works in amongst a huge amount of noise and stress and chaos. Grades do help get through a day in a productive way. It is a valuable tool, but it is a tool that has inherent values. And So when you say, when you think about your child, and I'm doing the same. I've got a 5-year-old son, Hudson, who's already been ranked and graded in various little minor kind of forms. Of course, the natural instinct as a parent is to ask, where's my child in the ranking? Because it's you want your child to be okay and normal-ish in a good way. But what are you like in terms of winning at school is really what we're asking. Are you doing okay in the game of school, which is measured by a grade? So there's a whole lot of value laden within grades that are measuring that are trying to measure what the overall value of school is, which is about trying to elevate students' ranking to get them into college. So I think that's interesting for a start. I think the answer, though, your question, David, is there an alternative to grades? And what we see, and it's a little bit utopian at this stage because we have to work within a system and we understand the reality of school. But I think what we're seeing in some of the world's best teachers is a capacity to think outside of grades. I think project-based learning is a great opportunity to do this. I think the International Baccalaureate is a great system. I think the mastery transcript in the US is another option where there's no grades at all. There's no numerical grades, no athletic grades assigned there. So we are seeing systems that are changing this, that we're measuring students on a whole range of other metrics and attributes, including their ability to cooperate and work collaboratively, to think differently, to think outside the square, not to get the answer on the test, but to think in these really productive ways that are very progressive. So there are opportunities to do things differently. We're just, again, really asking teachers to think about the possibility that maybe grades is not the only way to do things.
And I think it's important too to very differentiate between assessment and grades. Assessments has to happen. I don't know where you're at unless I can somehow assess what it is you're doing. Nowhere in that process does a letter or a score need to appear, because in that grade, letter, score, there is no inherent value. There is nothing that's going to push me to the next level of learning. So assessment has to be a snapshot of my particular performance with regard to my old performance, which will help feed into my future performance. So I think people conflate the two and say, let's get rid of assessment. No. You can't breathe without assessment. We get rid of that grading component of it, with that unusable, meaningless thing on the end, which only serves ranking, and maintain things that serve learning. Where were you last week? Where were you now? Where are we going next? So I think assessment sticks around, and then the joke becomes then the focus becomes learning. It doesn't matter if everyone learns at the same pace. In fact, I promise you, none of us actually do it. And now my learning becomes my learning. And I think this is what Dylan William comes through with this kind of formative assessment is, we're tracking things as we go. And now we've stripped the grades. So what have we lost? Here's what we've lost. Universities now don't know who to pick. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't know when it became my job as a teacher to spend 12 years ranking my kids to make your job as a university professor easier. If you want to sort out kids as a university, your dime, your time. And I promise you, they will find a ranking system. The second we get rid of grades, and they've done this in the US, enough schools have gotten rid of grades that a lot of other universities said, well, how are we going to know which kids to pick? And what they've done is they've created their own system. We want a portfolio. We want an interview. We want this. If all grades are doing is ranking kids for university, and that's pretty much all they're doing, they're not helping learning, so that's all they're doing, then let's just pass that buck back onto university. And just like a job, say, you sort out who you want. My job is to teach these kids, and when I think they're ready to get out of school, off they go. And now they can choose. Yep, I'd like to apply for this school. Here's the process. Yes, I'd like to apply here. Here's the process. And they can sort that stuff out. That's not our job to, okay. And by the way, I'd extend it. It's not the job of universities to prepare kids for work. Okay. If work wants to know who to hire, your dime, your time. I'm here to teach them about what the heck we want to learn about here at uni.
Okay, so I'm really sympathetic to that. I really like that idea. But I come back to that if we do this, how do we know that schools are doing a good job? How do we know that they're not wasting government money? Does that matter?
My guess would be through the process of formative assessment, you've got measures, you've got things, you've got evidence all throughout that entire process, where if anyone asks, you can say, here's what they're doing, here's where they started, here's where they got. They're not all at the highest level. They're not all at the lowest level. You can see their process individually. So you see things are happening. It's not a free for all where at the end of year 12, everyone goes, what'd you do? Well, I don't know. No, we've got assessment. We've got all this evidence that's meaningful for us. That evidence might be quantitative, might not be, but it's just not grade evidence, which serves no purpose that we can see.
Okay, so I'm not. Forgive me, I'm not quite ready to let this go. So let's take the example. No. I just want to sort of be convinced by you, but let's take the example of I take a driving test, and the examiner assesses that I'm not competent to be on the roads driving a car and fails me. I can retake that test, with a bit more practice and have another go. But I would argue that it's a valuable public service to fail incompetent drivers. Yeah. We don't need to give them a grade in that, but we do need that they take that assess and we judge. We're quantifying to the extent that we're saying, okay, so in the rank order of competent and incompetent, you're not at competent yet. Is that a useful model for education?
That doesn't faze me in the least. The concept of a binary a level of you're ready or you're not ready. You're fine or you're not fine. This guy can drive or he can't drive. A binary, though, is slightly different. Imagine if you took your driving test and you got a C+.
Yeah, no.
The hell does that mean?
For sure. So I'm just trying to explore sort of alternatives here. So some level of kind of like minimum standard competence might be a way forward for education.
And then you start to that doesn't faze me. And what I like about that concept is then you start to strip away some of these other things. And we didn't get to talk about this in the book. If there's ever a sequel, this will most certainly come in.
Right.
But this idea of now year levels of what we've tended to do is put the competency on the year level. So everyone needs to be here by this year, or you have to re-go through that year, and once you start to say, okay, if we can pull the grade system back and we think in a kind of a different way, you start to think that we maybe will lose those walls of the set classroom whereby every kid has to have it by January. And it could be that, yep, you passed your driving test the first time, off you go to the next class. And you could be with kids 2 years older than you, kids 3 years older than you. Yeah. Once we kind of start thinking outside of that realm, I think it opens up a lot more possibilities of what else are we doing that's just systematic that we could start to strip away and make this a little easier process.
Okay. All right. All right. That's interesting. So, okay, we'll move on. Because
I love it. I wish we could do this. We do an hour debate on. I would love this. I think it's a fantastic topic.
Let's do it.
There's no answers. So.
Let's commit to that. Maybe on one of your channels, guys. But so let me ask you, because I really liked the chapter on to computers. I thought that was really refreshing, really well argued. There's some great stories in there that I didn't know before, and so I've got another little quote from the book that I'd like to read for the viewers, which on computers, where you say it's worth mentioning that even without computers, students naturally struggle with lack of attention, shallow thinking, overconfidence, and other inimical learning behaviours. However, with computers, the likelihood of these behaviours is far greater. Seeing as many schools already struggle with engagement, why would we voluntarily throw a tool into the mix that exacerbates the problem while simultaneously harming the ultimate goal of learning? Strong words, guys, strong words. So can we justify a little bit of that?
Don't pull punches on this one. I'll take some of the stats. So computers are one of the funniest things in that we've known for 30 years that they don't work. I don't know how much more evidence we need that they don't work. If this was medicine and you had a drug that you were trying to sell and you had 30 years of evidence where the highest people in the world have analyzed it, meta-analyzed it, and keep coming back saying, oh, it's actually making your symptoms worse, or at best, it's not having any impact at all. No one would keep doing that research. The drug is off the table. Let's move on. This is the story with computers. We've known forever that they do not improve learning, and the best they can do is not harm it, and most of the time they tend to make it worse. And so in the chapter we go through, I don't even pull punches. I put 100 references because people think, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Go through the literature. It's not hard to do. I put 100 references and told you what each paper says, and those are some of the most cited papers in the field of education technology. And almost to a paper, they show either no impact or a detriment. It's not a good thing, yet we keep wanting it to be good. Why? Because my goodness, it should be good, right? It's ubiquitous. We all have one of these things. It feels good. It should work. The joke is computers in education are likely never going to work. And the problem is essentially we've already lost the battle. So we were talking earlier about tools changing our worldview.
Yeah.
Every tool we have has its basic purpose, its primary function, that when you give a person that tool, 9 times out of 10, they're going to think about it this way. A hammer has a primary function. As soon as I give you a hammer, you're going to start looking for something to hit. Now, it's not because a hammer can't be used for other things. Like you could, use it as a doorstop, throw it at a bird, open a bottle, whatever you want with it. But 90% of the time you use a hammer, you hit things. So as soon as you get the hammer, you start thinking about hitting things. Computers. Kids spend 2,000 hours a year using a computer to randomly flip between rapidly changing media. Twitter, Facebook, videos, all these things. 2,000 hours they've trained themselves to use this thing for essentially multitasking fun. About each year, kids will use less than 200 hours this machine for learning. We've already lost the battle. Anytime you sit a kid down in front of a computer and say, time to learn, you're now fighting 2,000 hours worth of training that says, oh yeah, but no, that's not what this machine is for. And they'll start to flip. They make it 6 to 15 minutes of learning before they go back into their primary function and start opening up tabs and looking at this and streaming these things. The battle with computers has been lost. It's not an educational tool. It was when TV came out. This was when Neil Postman used to write.
Yeah.
When television came out, you remember that everyone said television was going to change education. And the guy who invented television wanted it to change education. Problem, they lost the battle. TVs were in homes more than they were in the classroom. So that after enough time, kids learned to recognize a TV for sales, for entertainment, and it just didn't really work anymore as a classroom tool. It's the same thing with computers. We lost the battle. So trying to shoehorn in this kind of learning thing ain't working. And all the evidence just keeps saying it hasn't worked and it won't work. It's the story's done.
If I can just add a tiny bit, Jared, as well, is that you're talking in general here for most students in most school settings, and typically in kind of a mainstream school setting, Jared. But we do see some research clearly showing that computers have some benefit for students that have learning difficulties or certain types of learning difficulties or physical difficulties or disabilities. So there are certainly places where computers have a role. But the difference in those situations is that we're intentionally looking for a tool to solve a very specific problem that a child has, and then we search the world and we find a tool that matches that problem for a child with a physical learning disability, for example, or with deafness or blind, whatever it might be. When we do it for generic students or for mainstream students, we're not asking that question. No one has a main problem that they're trying to solve that computers is the clear solution to that problem. As Jared said, we roll out computers because they seem like it should make sense. They're nice and shiny. They're fun. It's kind of seems like there should be some value, but the reality is it doesn't work in mainstream schooling because it's not solving a problem. Where it is with some students that have these difficulties. So I think that's a key problem. The other thing is that it's not helping pedagogy. If we're going to spend billions and billions of dollars on computer technology, it's got to be solving again a significant pedagogical problem we have, or clearly showing significant pedagogical advantages. And we just don't see that with computers. That there are, of course, there are great examples of in some schools where teachers are using technology or computers in a really sophisticated, powerful way. Of course there is. But for most students in most schools, in most settings, really there is no benefit to computers that any of the literature shows.
Right. Okay. I mean, and so that's good, David. So you've made the argument a bit more nuanced, and obviously, most teachers these days, certainly in developed nations, are using computers the whole time. But not necessarily their students, and so that's an interesting sort of point to make. Okay. So one of the other things that you give a real kicking to in the book, if you don't mind me saying so, is mindset theory. What's wrong with mindset? Everyone loves mindsets. Do you guys just not have a growth mindset?
Sorry, we're fixed.
You're born intelligent or you're not. And unfortunately, Jared missed out on the genes and I got them. But no,
C'est la vie.
I'm going to start, Jared, and then I'm going to throw to you because Jared's a bit more fired up about this. I'm going to say that from what I see, and I've spent 10 years in working in positive psychology and positive education, working for 15 years as a classroom educator. Mindset, the belief that you will grow with practice, is absolutely essential for learning. There is no doubt that believing that you will grow via practice is crucial and a really important belief to have as an adult or as a child. And mindset is shiftable. It does change. It is like any belief, malleable and can change. And having a growth mindset is really powerful. And we've seen in Dweck's research and in a massive study done last year in the US that we can shift mindset and we can increase mindset a little bit. And when we do that, it has a little tiny impact in general on learning. So all of this
for
work
some
around
people,
mindset,
for a very specific subset of people.
So I'm just saying, I'm softening the blow here. We're
Yeah.
not anti-mindset. We're not anti-growth mindset. We absolutely believe it's essential. What we're talking about is the overinflation or the claims that people
Yeah.
make, or the over-exaggeration of the ability for mindset to be the panacea to education. So mindset matters. It can be shifted a little bit. It doesn't cost much. It's a very easy intervention in schools. It might only take an hour or two. So it is cute and nice and important. And Jared?
And look, I'm with you. I love it. Mindset is fantastic. The problem that, and I don't say everybody, and I don't say misinterpreted, the problem that Dweck, and she pushed this bandwagon herself, I don't know why she pretends she didn't, is that she tried to equate mindset with learning. Why? Why can't mindset be important for everything else? Mindset is important for the sake of mindset, for making sure kids feel more confident, that kids feel like they belong in their school, like they have more agency over their thinking. Nope. She came out and said mindset is going to boost scores and learning, and it doesn't. The sad fact is you could have the best mindset in the world, and if you sit on your thumb in the corner, you ain't going to learn a thing. You could have the worst mindset in the world, but if you go through the process of learning, I can make sure I get things into you. So I always say mindset is like an appetizer to learning, but it's not the main course. And she tried to make it the main course. And I work, my supervisor I work with, he made a great statement a while ago. He said, never attack the person, always attack the idea. And in this case, I'm very cognizant. The idea of mindset, love it. It's been way overblown. And the problem is that in this case, the idea has been overblown by the person who created it. So I can attack, and we do, I don't want to say attack, but in the book, we show you all the evidence that says it doesn't do what people says it does. And by people, I mean Dweck herself, who's now standing up saying, you guys misinterpreted me. You misread me. I'm being misinterpreted. No, I pull out quotes where she herself has flat out said mindset is more important than cognitive skills and abilities for learning, which is patently nonsense and false. So it's something that I think is a beautiful tool. I love the philosophy behind it. I love the concept. It's just the makers of it way overextended it. And so now you talk, David, and you can tell I'm holding back. I could soapbox on this pretty damn hard. But they just came out with that new study where they did it with 12,000 kids in the U.S. mindset intervention to show that it can increase grades. Of course, it didn't. Overall, it didn't. Why? Because it wouldn't. But what they then did is they took a subset of young people, or I'm sorry, the underachievers, to see what it would boost there. And they found, hey, 0.01 GPA boost in the course of a year. Now, why are you still trying to prove that mindset increases grades? Why are they harping on, it's like saying I have a medicine that cures cancer, but I really want to prove to you that I can also cure depression. Who cares? Use it for what it's good for. Don't try and shoehorn it into something it's not meant for. But even if you take that 0.1 GPA growth, whoop-de-doo, there are so many more interventions over the course of a year. Tutoring is one that can grow GPA on average 2.3. So 0.1 versus 2.3. As a strat, it's not even that good. And when you consider that you have about 1.5 million kids who are on track for failure this year, that little 0.1 boost is going to make sure that 1.425 million of them still fail. It's not a learning tool, yet we keep trying to make it that. Use it for what it's good for. It's a well-being. It's an aspect of personal growth and development. It's not an aspect of I'm going to drive your GPA, your score up through the roof. And I don't know why she harps on that so much. Sorry.
No, because if anything, I think you're probably more charitable to growth mindset than I was in my book Making Kids Cleverer, where I sort of take it to the cleaners a little bit as well, and talk about the fact that Dweck herself says when people fail to replicate her experiments, she says, well, they're doing it wrong. It's really hard to replicate. If it's so hard to replicate, maybe we should be avoiding it in the classroom.
Good rule of thumb in science is if the person who invents a thing is the only person who can continue to show that thing and no one in the outside can do it, what you're looking at is, in science isn't perfect. What you're looking at is our beliefs driving our theories, driving our interpretation. I was a trap to that 10 years ago. I was doing it myself. It happens. People get really attached to their theories and we push our data in that way. We're not perfect.
Well, and the one thing we can say, one of the huge benefits of growth mindset is that it's made a lot of money.
Hey, there you go.
So on that, very successful. Anyway, let's leave
perfect.
Growth mindset. I could go on talking to you guys forever. I really want people to know, and I don't always say this, so I'm being really, really explicit. I enjoyed the book. I really valued reading it. It was a relatively quick read. I read it in one sitting in one evening. It's packed full of great stories, many of which we haven't even touched on. So even if you find that you don't agree with this, I'm speaking for you here, David and Jared, but I think you don't mind if people agree with you. You just want to sort of try and provoke deeper thought, don't you? And it certainly does that. So highly recommended, 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right by Dr. Jared Cooney, Horvath, and David Bott. Thanks so much for allowing me to waste so much of your time for you after the end of a long day in Australia, me in the morning. But brilliant. So thanks ever so much. And
no, thank you. You have a good Friday. It's our Friday night, so we can go have a scotch. You now have to work today.
David, can I just say, David, thank you as well for all the work you're doing in highlighting educators from around the world. And sometimes work that's happening in Australia doesn't necessarily get to UK and vice versa. So really appreciate that you're providing a platform for educators around the world to share and to think deeply. So really appreciate all the work you're doing as well. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
You can run and hide.